It's highly recommended that any engineers wishing to advance their careers in the consulting engineering sector should consider registering for this program. Registration for the 2024 BCE MDP course is opened, so you can register now. And for details of the course and many other training courses offered by the CESA School of Consulting Engineers, kindly click on the training heading on the CESA website, which is just cesa.co.za. And if you or a colleague are interested in attending the BCE MDP, you're advised to look out for the information sessions that are held throughout the year. I know one has recently been held, and you're welcome to phone us for more information. I'd also like to inform you that the webinar is being recorded and that the presentations will be available after the webinar on the CESA website by clicking on the headings Guidelines, then Presentations. And to access the recording of the webinar, simply go to the CESA website, click on the YouTube icon, and scroll through the recordings. Before we get started, I'd like to outline some of the house rules for our delegates or viewers. On the taskbar at the bottom of the screen, you will see the chat and the Q&A icons. Please use the chat for any comments you may have, and the Q&A for any questions you would like to ask the presenters. To unpack today's topics, we are very fortunate to have two knowledgeable panelists joining us, for which we thank them greatly, of course. They will each deliver their presentations, and importantly, only at the end of the webinar will there be a separate question and answer session, which will cover both presentations, and thereafter the proceedings will end with some closing remarks. The first panelist will be Diane Liebenberg, who is a professional structural engineer. She is a member of the CESA Quality Risk and Sustainability Committee and a lecturer at the CESA School of Consulting Engineering. Diane is passionate about quality management and has her own consulting practice in quality management, mainly to advise consulting engineers on how to obtain ISO 9001 certification. Diane is currently the chairperson of the subcommittee that manages the development and implementation of the MSDs, which are the management system declarations. There's 3 of them, they're mandatory, so every firm has to complete these declarations. And as a matter of interest, our other panelist is also a member of the subcommittee, so it's an important CESA subcommittee. Diane will speak on CESA Practice Note 102, which deals with implementing an integrated management system in emerging member firms. Diane was generally involved in the development of the MSDs, but was largely responsible for the development of the quality MSD. As Diane lectures and consults on quality management systems, there's no better placed person to address us on this topic. So at this point, I'd like to hand over to Diane. So it's over to you, Diane.
Great. Thanks, Wally, and welcome to everyone who's joined the webinar. It's always an honor to be invited to present on the CESA webinar. So Wally, thank you for that. Today, I'm going to be talking about implementing an integrated management system in emerging member firms. If you are not an emerging firm and you're quite established, I still think you'll walk away today with some valuable knowledge on how to basically develop and implement an integrated management system within your organization. Right, so the reason why we're having this webinar is basically to introduce the new practice note, and that is PN 102. It basically takes you through how you can develop and implement an integrated management system. So it's not just focusing on one type of management system, but we're rather looking at trying to incorporate a number of management systems into one to prevent duplication, and especially when we think about the requirements of CESA with regard to member firms. Also, we found that, the younger emerging firms, they don't have the historical background of management systems. They're generally new, they start up, so this will hopefully give them a good grounding of where they can actually go to from here when they want to put together a management system within their organization. So the presentation contents basically cover the contents of that practice note 102. We're just quickly going to look at what is a management system. We'll touch on how to plan your management system. We'll look at how you go about identifying processes. And then we'll look at how you document your process requirements. And this is basically, we'll just go a bit into process mapping. Once you've developed your system, we'll look at training, implementing, and improving your system going forward. And then the second last slide is basically, we identify typical processes that you can include within a management system. And this actually gives you a really nice framework from where you can evolve out of. And then lastly, we'll just have a look at some tips for developing effective management systems. Right, so let's start off with what is a management system. And I'm going to read this definition because I actually think the definition basically encompasses the whole webinar. So a management system is defined as a system housing policies, processes, and procedures used by an organization to ensure that it can fulfill the tasks required to achieve its objectives. A management system is a key tool in helping to streamline your business processes and build in efficiency. Implementation of the appropriate management system and certifying to the appropriate standard to your business improves business performance and embeds safe and sustainable practices into your operations. So I've highlighted sort of the key areas there that we are going to go through today. So the first one is a management system houses your policies, processes, and procedures. So that basically is the core. It's the information that you want to communicate to your staff on what your management system is all about. And you'll see today we're going to try and move away from the old school and try to go down a route of looking at more technology and embracing technology and seeing how you can pull it into your management system. The second highlight there is objectives. It must align with company objectives. The third one, which I absolutely love, it's a key tool that streamlines your business and it must make you efficient. I think lots of management systems are seen as cumbersome, not user-friendly. So when you're developing your systems, you must think of what is going to be the easiest, the system that's going to be most effective within our organization. And then the last part there is just certifying to an appropriate standard. It's always good to base your management system on some sort of set of requirements. And going forward, then you can be audited against those requirements. You can get certificates, but we'll talk about that a bit later in this slide. Yeah, so the definition is really great because it sort of gives us the springboard for our whole webinar. The second point I've included there is just the different types of management systems that you can get. So CESA requires that all its member firms must implement a quality management system. You must implement an integrity management system and a project sustainability management system. And while he mentioned earlier about the MSDs, Charles is going to go into more detail of what CESA's requirements are, specifically relating to these three management systems. But over and above that, there are stacks of management systems out there that you can consider implementing. One that a lot of consultants and especially contractors embrace is your health and safety management system. You can maybe look at a risk management system, an environmental management system, and it can also expand like into your support system. So have a human resource management system, a financial management system. So it's actually, it's almost endless, the types of management systems that you can identify and you can say, these are what we want to include within our organization. The third point there I've just put is requirements. It's like I've said, and it's in the definition as well. It's really a good idea to base your management system on a set of requirements. So CESA basically bases their quality, integrity, and project sustainability management systems. They base those on the requirements of FIDIC. And again, Charles is going to go into a lot of detail about that. So we have the FIDIC requirements. Also, a really good set of standards to look at is your ISO requirements, especially when you're looking at your quality your health and safety, your environmental. And quite recently, I've seen a lot of organizations embracing the BIM ISO standard as well. So think about those. And then there are other requirements that you can consider. If you're into maybe food processing, designing systems for food processing, you might want to comply with EHEDGE. What I personally really like is the CESA project stages and the requirements per project stage. I use those to build them into my systems to make sure that we also comply to what CESA requires. And then we get on to the fourth point, which talks about integrated systems. And I think this is important, is when you look at all your different systems, is not to go and develop them in silos, but try and pull them all together. You'll be amazed at how much duplication there is between the different management systems. So when you decide, you're going to go down that route, think of the management systems that you'd like to have in place, and then think of what is the core processes, and get that to form your framework. And that towards the end of the presentation, we'll just give you a slide which will really help you putting together that core. And by doing that, you're going to actually prevent duplication within your systems, which is a very good idea, because I find duplication in a management system is very redundant. Right, then we get to the second part, which is basically planning your management system. So once you've identified what are the management systems that you want to implement, we can start looking at how you're going to plan them. So the first step is to identify your scope, your purpose, and your objectives. So you've got to think, what do we want to achieve? And with each management system, that will drive you to set up a management system policy. So that's sort of the vision of where do you want to be. The second thing to consider is, where are you going to achieve it? So especially if you're not a single office, if you have many offices, you might find that different management systems are run in different offices. So for example, if you've got a head office, they might run all your support services, like your human resource management, your financial management. If you might have a site office, they will look probably more heavily into the health and safety management system. So think about where you're going to implement these different management systems. Then the third point under number 1 is, who will be responsible for that management system? And I think this is really, really important. And I encourage, if you're going down that route, is get someone from top management to head up your management system. It's got to be seen as coming from the top. It's got to be seen as top management has bought into the system. They're aligning it with their strategy. They're implementing what they say they do. So to have that sort of person sort of spearheading and driving it is very important. And then the last point is, think how you're going to measure your system. So like I said in the previous slide, think of what your set of requirements are going to be. Are you going to base it on the ISO? Are you going to base it on the FIDIC? Are you going to base it on the CESA? Even as a great starting point is just the CESA MSD questionnaires. Brilliant place to start thinking of what are the requirements of your management system. Then the second point, once you've identified your scope, your purpose, and objectives, it's then to start planning your format and your media. And I think this is where we can get very creative. And this is where I encourage guys to move away from the old school paper-based systems and start embracing technology. Pull in smart apps, apps on smartphones. Use those within your management systems. Pull in all your existing systems into your management system. So if you have an ERP system or a human resource system, pull that into your management system. And then also decide on what platform do you want to make this information available to staff. Lots of consultants go with SharePoint. I've seen MS Teams working very well as a platform to share information. So think of these things up front. And like I say, embrace technology when you start the planning of your system. And then the third point there is determine your documented requirements, especially if you're going electronic. And always I say, the majority of what we do as engineers is we produce information. So set up really comprehensive filing structures. Make sure these are carried throughout the organization. So it's not just related to one area of the business, you need to make sure that all your different areas of the business have a really good filing structure. Set up good file naming conventions so that when people save information, they know exactly what it is, what's the latest version, is it signed, is it not signed, that type of information. Those two are really important because I think also in this day and age with the turnover that we're having in staff, people are moving around between organizations. And if someone leaves your organization, you need to be able to have the confidence to know where's all the information stored, can I have access to it? The third point is also just think about securities, especially when you're going into like your human resource management systems, you're dealing with a lot of confidential information. You need to comply with POPI, so make sure that your systems do have those securities on them and that only sort of authorized personnel can access certain information. And then the fourth one under there is templates. And for me, this is so important, is before you even embark on developing your management system, think of all your templates that you might need. So it's letterheads, it's report templates, it's drawing title blocks. Get those into a state that is consistent across the board. So look at your logo, look at your branding, look at your fonts, your font that you use within the organization. And at the same time, if you need certain information to be present on a template, like if you've got a report template, you will want to know who is the author, who is the reviewer, who is the authorizer. Include it on your templates up front. So whoever's completing the template, they're prompted to enter in the correct information. And then the last one also is start thinking about organizational knowledge. Gather all the knowledge that you have that you need to make available to staff, create libraries, but get it in a centralized location that staff can have easy access, especially if they're getting into their day-to-day activities within the organization. Great, so that was basically just looking at the planning of what your management system is going to look like. So we basically identified these are the management systems we want. This is how we're going to represent the management systems. It's then you need to start identifying your processes within your organization that you need in order to achieve the objectives of the management system. So the first thing to ask yourself is, what is a process? So a process is basically something that has an input and an output, and using the input in a controlled environment with your available resources, you produce an output. And just to give you an example of that, like if I'm designing a foundation, my input would be my geotechnical investigation, maybe my load-in from different consultants. It could be my architectural layout to see how the loads come down. So those are all my inputs. And then within a controlled environment, I'll using maybe design software, I can size the foundation, and my output is the actual size of the foundation. And then what's interesting with the process approach is that output then becomes the input to the next process. So that will become the input into my drafting process. So my CAD staff will take the size of the foundation, and in their controlled environment, using their resources, they'll go and model the structure or produce a 2D layout of the foundation layout. And their output is then that layout for construction. Then their output becomes the input into the contractor's process. So he'll take that foundation layout together with all the specifications. In his controlled environment, he will fix the rebar, he will cast it, and the output is the actual foundation at the end of the day. So that's basically just looking at a process. And then when you interlink all these processes, that's actually when you start forming a management system. So again, your processes cannot act in isolation. You need to think about how do they interlink with each other? How do they impact on each other? And as soon as you start interlinking all your processes, that actually forms your management system. Also, what I find very important when you identify your processes is have a process champion. It just basically includes everyone within your organization. It gives people responsibility and authority. And they also feel like they're part of everything. They're part of what's happening. They're part of the development. They can approach you with maybe best business practice. So it's really important is to identify process champions and involve them in the whole process. Then point 4, just look at your inputs and your outputs for each process. I mentioned CESA at the start. I really refer a lot to CESA and even the PROXA document of what our outputs, especially when we're looking at project delivery, what our outputs should be per stage. So you can use that as a prompt. And then the 5th step in identifying your processes is basically identifying your activities within each process. And these activities must allow you to basically align with your strategy and meet your objectives and requirements. So this was right at the start when we talked about planning your system, setting objectives. So your activities must meet those objectives and those requirements. The 3rd point is mitigate risk and enhance opportunity. So when you're looking at a process, think of the risk involved in that process. Think of what's gone wrong in the past. Look at your lessons learned. Look at failures and successes of the past and try and work that into the activities within that process. Because I always had a mentor who said, we can't make the same mistakes. Let's learn from our mistakes. Let's rather make different mistakes. So look at what's happened in the past, look at your lessons learned, and use that to build your management system. And then naturally with each process, you're going to have interested parties associated with that process. So just make sure that you identify those interested parties and you make sure that their needs and expectations are actually addressed when you are considering the activities of that process. Right, so then we get to basically just documenting your process. What are the requirements? I always encourage here to use the basic quality management principles of the Plan, Do, Check, Act. So every process that you start mapping out should have the Plan, Do, Check, Act cycle. So if I'm thinking when I'm designing my foundation, my plan is the criteria, it's my design assumptions. I then execute it in my controlled environment. When I do the check-in, I check back against my plan. So have I actually designed it correctly? Have I designed it to the correct assumptions? And if not, I need to act and fix it. And what's so important with the Plan, Do, Check, Act cycle is you need to make sure that whatever your output is, it's correct, it's on time, because your output becomes the input into the next process. So that's why including the Plan, Do, Check, Act with each process is so important. I often say, as consultants, we work in the horizontal. I mean, I've done that time and time again with crisis management, and I call it then we do and we react. We sort of bounce between the two. We're doing it, we issue it, it's not right, we react, we fix it, we reissue, and we sort of bounce between the two. Take the time when you start mapping out your processes to include the horizontal. So include the time to plan, include the time to check. Then document your processes graphically. This is for me one of the biggest winners in a management system. Try and move away from too much written word. Try and display your processes graphically so it's easy for guys to understand. I find staff, they don't have the time to go and read something that's in-depth or has got too many pages or whatever. So try and make it as easy as possible for your staff to access and also to follow. So I love process flows. Everything that I do, I document in a process flow. I've seen some organizations use turtle diagrams, and the turtle diagrams are really great because it prompts you of all the different facets of a process, what you need to be thinking of when you start mapping it out. Then the 3rd part is you can then start assigning documents and records. Basically procedures. Procedures will add on to your process flow, so they'll give you further instruction on how to execute the process. Again, what's very nice here is look at your competency of your staff. The more competent your staff are, the less you actually need to document or instruct them on how to do something. So assess competency levels, and naturally vice versa. The less competent staff are, they might need more work instructions on how to do something. So always keep that in the back of your head. And then the 2nd point under assigning documents as records is records. And for me, this is so important. It's make sure you're producing evidence of how something was done. So anything that you do, make sure you've got a record of how it was done, what was the level of compliance, so that anyone comes and challenges you at the end of the day, you can pull out the record and show that you have actually done it. And I think this is also where it's a sad part, that you only see the value of a record is when someone challenges you. And I think this is also where the stigma comes around of management systems are cumbersome. They're driven by administration and documents. So when you're thinking of what records you need to show as evidence at the end of a process, think about the risk, think about what can go wrong, think about what challenges could possibly come out of your process, and have enough records to cover yourself there. Yeah, then we're getting quite to the end. Basically, we then look at training, implementing, and improving the system. So once you've pulled your system together, you've got it up and running, it's so important to make staff aware of the system. And I also focus on the consequences if they do not follow the system. So if they're not going to follow a certain step, they must know there's a consequence involved. With your implementation, I always recommend is draw a line in the sand. Don't, I always say focus forward. Don't go back and try and change history. Have a date and say, right, from this date onwards, we're implementing our new management system. So have that line in the sand, look forward, but at the same time, think about risk. So say I'm employing a new staff member. So I'll say this needs to be done in the new management system, and I'll get contracts in place and all that type of stuff. But then I'll go and review my existing staff members. If I see there's a risk, maybe I don't have a contract in place, then that's the only time I'll go back into history and start getting that document just to cover me with that risk. So the only time I ever go back and change history or update history is when I see it is a potential risk to the organization. And then the third step, once you've got your system developed, staff is trained, it's implemented, you then need to start improving your system. And this is where you collect data, you analyze the data, and based on factual decisions, you actually start improving. And that data that you can collect, you can basically measure against your objectives and your requirements that you stated right at the start when you were doing the planning of your management system. Then I've included this slide. I think this is a great place to start if you are going to develop an integrated management system. I've based it on the ISO frameworks, and you'll see the ISO has a lot of different management systems available. There are lots of standards, and the format or the framework of all the different standards is very similar. So if you're looking at this, this will give you basically your core sort of functions that you need within a management system. And if you get that correct, then you can start plugging in all your different requirements for the different types of management systems. So just to run through this quickly, at the top, you've got your context and your strategy. So this talks a lot to establishing your context within the industry, thinking about internal, external issues, thinking about your interested parties, thinking about what is your scope, what is your strategy, what do you want to deliver? And within that, you need to identify, right, these are the processes that I need to achieve the strategy. So that is your basically the start, the context and the strategy. The next step is to plan your system. So like we said, set up the objectives, think about your risks, your hazards, your opportunities, know how you're going to manage those. Consider legal and compliance issues. What do we need to comply with? And also in your planning of your management system, make sure that you do have ways to identify change and implement them into your system. So we just make sure that the management system is agile, it's changing to external factors, it's never become stagnant, it's always dynamic, it's always improving. The gray block has to do with operations, and this is generally within our industry, it will be operations within project delivery. So map out all your operations and have a strong focus on the planning and the control requirements. So again, that ties in with the plan, do, check, act cycle. Focus on planning and control with each activity within project delivery. And project delivery has to go right from the start when a project is first identified, right to the end when you hand it over to the client. And then the green box looks at all your supporting services. So everything that you need support on within your operations. So this could expand to your human resource management, financial management, infrastructure management, Communication, I'm finding communication is becoming easier with all the technology, but it's becoming so difficult to manage communication. So it's good to think about that. Documentation control, we've spoken about libraries. So look at all your supporting services, and you'll find that, you know, with whatever management system you have, there's a lot of overlap in the support services. Then from all of these processes, you then need to pull out your data. And this goes into your performance evaluation. So you're going to pull out data from each of these processes. You're going to analyze that data against your objectives and to see how compliant are you. And also by analyzing this data, it allows you to make factual decisions. And those factual decisions will lead to improvement, to say, how can we increase our objectives, or how can we increase our level of compliance? And then your improvement needs to feed through the most important part of the whole framework is your leadership and top management. Leadership and top management then need to drive this improvement throughout your management system. And in addition to that, your leaders also need to make sure that they are committed. So I've spoken about that. They have to have strong commitment to the management system. They need to be there to set up policy, codes of practice, all that type of stuff. They need to make sure that they've assigned roles and responsibilities throughout the organization. And like I said, they need to drive continual improvement. So this is a great slide. Use this, you know, if you're thinking about doing an integrated management system and you're not quite sure sort of what are those sort of the core functions that you don't want to duplicate from one management system to the other. Right, and then it just brings me to my last slide. It's tips for developing effective management systems. So like I said, top management support is essential. Less is more. I mean, start with the basics, and you can flesh that out as you go. Don't try and implement everything at once. Think about what are the risks that you are exposed to. That should actually drive that core of your management system. Download the CESA MSD declarations. Like I said, Charles is going to talk about it now, but they are a fantastic start to get you going with your management system. They ask a number of questions, but each question, associated with each question, is quite a bit of information that will give you direction on what you could be doing within your organization to address that question. And then naturally seek training or assistance to help you develop the system. I mean, speak to Wally, he'll put you in touch with people. Go to the School of Consulting Engineers. They have wonderful courses out there. I know there's one coming out, I think it's next week, for your ISO 45001, which is your health and safety. So learn more, know what's there, understand more, and then pull that into your management system. And then I'm just going to leave you with my last visual that I always love to share. To prevent us from having a cumbersome, paper-driven system that, you know, is so old school, think of these 6 pointers. And the first one is be creative. Like, take your blinkers off, think differently. We don't have to have, you know, loads and loads of manuals and procedures. Let's approach it differently. The second one is use technology. I mean, use your smartphone, use apps, especially when the guys are out on site. How can you incorporate that back into your management system? The third icon is risk. I say, always think of risk. What can go wrong? What's gone wrong in the past? How can our management system actually prevent this from happening in the future? The fourth icon is use existing documents. Go into your organization, see what works. You'll find some documents staff absolutely love and they fill it out because they understand it, they see the benefit, and you'll find other documents just don't get done. So when you're starting out, go and have a look and see which are the documents that really work for the organization. The fifth icon there is systems. Look at what existing systems you got. Pull your ERP system or your financial system into your management system. That I find that there's a lot of duplication there, especially when it comes to management of clients, management of suppliers, that type of stuff. So make sure you incorporate your existing systems into your management system. And then the last one is question everything. If it's not covering a requirement, if it's not covering a risk, if it's not covering sort of an organizational decision, then you have to ask yourself, why are we actually doing this? So question everything. Everything you must see must add benefit to your organization. Great. I think that brings me to the end of the presentation. And I think, sorry, Charles, I've gone over a few minutes. But I just want to thank everyone for joining the webinar. I want to thank CESA as well for hosting it. And I wish you guys all the best of luck going forward with implementing management systems. And like I said, feel free to reach out to Wally if you need any assistance whatsoever. So on that note, Wally, I'd like to hand back to you.
Thank you, Diane. It really was a great presentation, and you gave us valuable guidelines and practical pointers, especially the last 6 sort of pointers on the implementation of an integrated management system, which I found very enlightening. And I'm sure it's going to be of great value to members attending this webinar. Just a reminder that Diane's presentation will be uploaded to the CESA website. At this point, I'd just like to remind the audience that to the members that CESA tries hard to empower its members with useful information or guidance through its practice notes and through webinars and presentations such as Diane's. This is just one of the many benefits of CESA membership, and we encourage all engineering practices, consulting engineering practices, to consider applying for CESA membership. It really has great benefits. So if you are interested in CESA membership, kindly contact Ms. Gillian Wands, our membership administrator, at 011-463-2022, which is the CESA switchboard number, and or at her email address, which is gillian@cesa.co.za. Our second, moving on, our second panelist will be Charles Celia, who is a professional civil engineer and a technical director at CESA member firm Jones and Wagner, and who's an active member of the CESA Quality Risk and Sustainability Committee. Having been involved with the development of the MSDs from the beginning of the project, Charles is well qualified to address us on this topic, and which is on the alignment of CESA requirements, or the MSDs, with the integrated management system contained in practice note 102. So I'd like to hand over to Charles at this point. So over to you, Charles.
Hi, Wally. Thank you very much for that very kind introduction. So as Wally suggested, I'm going to be talking about CESA's requirements in relation to management systems of member firms. I want to start my presentation with the contents of what I'm going to be talking about. So I'll first spend some time discussing what are CESA's requirements. And then I'll spend a few minutes talking about why they are required. Then I'll go on to how does a member show their systems are in place. And there I'll talk about the declarations. When the next point will be, when are the systems required to be in place? And then lastly, I'll end off with who can assist and where can additional information be found. So CESA requires each member firm to have the following, and these were touched on by Diane earlier, but I'll go through them nonetheless. So first of all is a quality management system, or referred to as a QMS. The next one is an integrity management system, or FIMS. And then the third one is the project sustainability management system. All three of these are required in general because they really help a firm develop management systems which at the end of the day manage risk of the company, as well as ensure sustainable sort of operations. So just some points on these systems. The first one, the quality management system, the highest level that a member can really achieve in this is ISO 9001. At least the highest level that can be certified. With the integrity management system, that's generally the code of conduct that each member firm has. And then the third project sustainability management system just talks about how sustainability becomes integral to all the operations of the company. So as Diane said, it's possible to have one management system and to integrate all of these into one. CESA just focuses on these three, but Diane did touch on some other management systems that are available. So perhaps maybe let's talk about why these systems are required. As Diane said, you know, we want to get away from systems that are overcomplicated and inefficient. So there must be a real need for these systems, and CESA has identified just that. So basically, CESA states that all its members have these three systems in place in varying degrees in order to classify as a CESA member. And why this is the case is it essentially ensures clients who use CESA members for their work that there is a minimum level of management system in place, and this basically limits risk on the project. Whether that risk arises from a quality issue or a breach of integrity, it's still a risk nonetheless. Having a project sustainability management system in place ultimately benefits the environment, the country, and society as a whole. But as well, I mean, there's an international push to become more sustainable. And, you know, South Africa needs to increase its focus on sustainability so that we can compete in the international arena. CESA is aligned to FIDIC, which is an internationally recognized standard of contract and project management documentation. And FIDIC have many guidelines which can be used to achieve a suitable level of management system while working towards ISO certification. So while your system may not be at the level where you can become ISO certified, if you use these FIDIC documents as reference guides, they can show where the gaps are in your systems, and you can work on those gaps and build up your system as you go. I'd just like to refer to some of the points in the CESA's Code of Conduct where that need for the quality management system comes in. Not necessarily only the quality management, but all three management systems. Let's focus first on quality. And their code of conduct under clause 2.8 says each member is required to implement and maintain a system of quality management in their practice, and also to provide work or services of a quality and scope and to a level which are commensurate with accepted standards and practices. So if you have these management systems in place, the end result or the output, as Diane referred to it, would be ensured that it meets a specific level of quality. Let's talk about integrity and focus first on corruption. So neither offer nor accept a reward of any kind, which in perception or in effect either seeks to influence the process of selection or compensation of consulting engineers, or seeks to infect their independent judgment. So essentially, you know, you must be working with due diligence and applying your skills and not necessarily accepting any sort of reward which may impact that and take it away from the most optimal solution. And then just the last point below, members are required to report to CESA any incidents of bribery or corruption that come to their notice. And if this was a requirement in their management system, it would be automatically done. Lastly, clause 2.1 in their code of conduct talks about integrity, and it says members are required at all times to act in the legitimate interests of their clients and other stakeholders involved, and to discharge their duties with integrity, faithfulness, confidentiality, efficiency, competence, and so on. So that's sort of where the connection of the quality management systems and the CESA requirements come into play. But let's look at some claim trends. Now, I've taken this slide from the CESA presentation, which was given on the 18th of September of this year in association with Aon, where they presented statistics from their risk dashboard. And they said these are the common clauses that are leading to PI claims. And I'll go through them, but you'll see I've highlighted them in different colors. And this is just basically talking about my view and experience of these. But if you had a QMS and an integrity management system in place, you could address these before they become claims. So let's just start with the first one, inexperienced engineers. If your quality management system had a focus on employing the right resources, making sure that they were competent by doing ongoing training, you would address this issue and make sure that the work's been done by experienced, competent people. The next three are all sort of related, going along the first row towards the right. Defective designs, lack of supervision, and calculation errors. If your QMS requires ongoing review and PRN sign-off, you would definitely mitigate any sort of issues which arise from these. And just linking back to what Diane said, if you think about having sufficient evidence and enough records, by having a formal review process and PRN sign-off, you are not only making somebody responsible for signing off of these, but you're also having the record to show that they're responsible. Then the second row, first one on the left, unclear scope of works. If you align your QMS system to ISO standards, they have a requirement for customer focus, where you have to spend time with the client at the initial stage of the project and make sure you determine the exact requirements. This would make sure that there's no problems that arise from misunderstanding the scope of works. Employee dishonesty, this I've highlighted green. Obviously, that's linked to the integrity management system. If you have a management system or code of conduct which requires employees to act honestly and with integrity, you would get away from cases that arise from this problem. And then the last one, the fast tracking projects, I've highlighted that in both green and brown because that could be a QMS shortfall or an integrity management shortfall. If you don't have the right staff, if you don't do sufficient planning and control, then your projects will most likely overrun. And then what happens is you start taking shortcuts, and that's when you're not acting with integrity because you might be issuing reports without them having been reviewed, but you've signed off that you've reviewed it, and that's where problems start to arise. And they said the majority of these claims relate to defective design, which later led to either collapses of buildings or other types of problems. And that's what we're trying to do by implementing these management systems. And that's why CESA has made this a requirement to make sure that their members, try as much as possible to mitigate the claims that arise from these. And lastly, just one other comment I wanted to say, tying back to a point that Diane made, is leadership. If leadership are responsible for the management system, management systems, then they ultimately take responsibility for these issues that lead to claims. So they would drive building up that management system and developing it to progress towards, say, ISO 9001 certification. Okay, so how does a member show their systems are in place? Well, CESA have made this really easy by setting up the annual management system declarations for the quality, the integrity, and the project sustainability system. So each member has to fill out these declarations each year. We've made it even easier by keeping last year's answers in. So when you do it the next year, it's only a matter of doing the updates from your previous submission. So these declarations were generated using various FIDIC guidelines. The Quality, Risk and Sustainability Committee were tasked with updating the declarations, and we identified FIDIC guidelines which could be used. As Diane said, these guidelines have requirements for how you can, phrase specific questions to see how developed a member's management system is, and then also highlight where they can work on some of the systems that aren't yet in place. CESA are also piloting a verification process this year, whereby the MSD committee is meeting with member firms and working through the declarations and, you know, breaking down each question they go and saying, this is what CESA wants, you know, in terms of evidence and what the system should be achieving. And then verifying the accuracy of their answers. You know, in some cases, you know, we've probably piloted 10 member firms this year, and in some cases, members, you know, answered no. But when we delved down into their system, it actually turned out that they were doing what we wanted. It was just a misunderstanding of the requirements. And then there's also a CESA policy or procedure document that can be referred to, which basically has background information on how the MSDs were developed and the reference documents. And these can be referenced when you're filling out the MSD. There's a link at the top and you can download it from there. So when are the systems required to be in place? And this is a really important point I want to make, is that CESA does not expect member firms to have 100% in their first year of filling out the MSDs. We've been running for 2 or 3 years now, so obviously there's been some improvements in members' records, and that's ultimately what they want to see, is that there's a development, there's an increase in how developed your system is from 1 year to another. Obviously, ultimately aiming for that 100% mark, and then, you know, eventually, where you can, certifying it to some standard where you can actually get audited and certified. For the quality management system, if the member firm is certified to ISO 9001, like I said, that's the highest certification that CESA recognizes. And if that's in place, then it's not necessary to do the MSD, the QMS MSD. They automatically score 100%. Unfortunately, for the integrity management system and project sustainability, CESA are still investigating what type of certification, ISO or other, that can be used to exempt members. So we are asking members to fill out information if they do have that certification in place. But we haven't yet achieved a point where we've recognized those as exempting members. So all members are required to fill out the full declaration for the integrity and project sustainability management system. Okay, and then who can assist with further information? So members are welcome to contact Wally at CESA, who will direct their questions to the correct person. The School of Consulting Engineers, Consulting Engineering, sorry, as Diane said, has various courses available on setting up an integrated management system and other management systems, and all of it can tie back into your integrated management system. As Diane suggested, there's this new practice note 102, which has recently been published, contains lots of useful information on management systems. There's also the QMIG and RMIG, which stands for the Quality Management Implementation Guideline, and Risk Management Implementation Guideline. And those are 2 excellent documents, which also have a lot of information which you can use to assist you. You can refer to the FIDIC references that we use to develop the MSDs. As you're filling out the MSD, each question you'll see has a specific reference to the section in FIDIC where we developed our question from there. So you can go back to the FIDIC document, refer to that section. It will give you much more information on what we are trying to ask for in terms of what FIDIC say would address that point. And then obviously there's ISO standards. If you're trying to get to ISO 9001, you would have that standard in front of you, and that would obviously have a lot of information which you could use as well. And then lastly, the point I made is that if you do identify some sections in your MSD, or you're not quite sure what we're asking for when filling these out, you're welcome to contact CESA and discuss verification of your member firm. And that would help a lot with confirming your understanding of what you do know and highlighting areas where you can develop further. So just in summary, answering the few questions as to how CESA and the MSDs relate. First of all, why? We want to limit the risk faced by the firm, and we want to constantly increase the level of management. So you do this by having the systems in place, which basically flag and prompts you to do certain things in management. Second point is how. Complete the annual MSD and request verification if required. That's essentially how do you go about proving your level of management systems in place. And then when there's no defined date that these have to be 100% up to the MSD level, but you are required to show improvements year on year. And then lastly, who or where to get more information. You can contact CESA, you can refer to the FIDIC documents, and you can also refer to the ISO standards. So that's essentially my presentation, Wally. Thanks, and over to you.
Thank you very much. I had slight trouble switching on my picture. Thank you very much, Charles. That was great, and you presented very ably. And you've provided us with a framework, which is framework and understanding of the CESA management system, which encompasses the 3 MSDs, as you so nicely outlined. And as previously mentioned, the presentation will be available on the CESA website. So at this stage, I'd like to pose the questions submitted by the delegates to the panelists for their response. But I think all accolades to our presenters. There don't seem to be any questions from the floor, from the audience, but I do have a couple of questions that I'd like to put to them and that the audience might enjoy. So I hope so. Okay. So the first question I'd like to put to Diane is the implementation of an integrated management system, the design and development of it is fairly complex. Even if you want a basic system, but if you want a good system, and would you advise the employment of an expert in this field to assist and guide the process? I know there are training courses and so forth, but attending a training course is, it's a little bit challenging to then go on and develop a system. And so how would you guide someone over and above your presentation? Thank you.
I think, I've seen it quite often where firms will engage with a consultant, and very often the consultant doesn't have an engineering background. And they don't understand the implications, especially when it comes to design, because lots of industries omit the design portion. If you look at manufacturing, you're just manufacturing something, you're not designing. So they don't have a good grasp on that. So I think if you are going to go with an external consultant, is to find someone that can assist you, that has that background knowledge. But also what I find with some consultants is they do make the system very cumbersome. And I actually encourage member firms is, if you're going for a system, understand what the requirements are. So that's why I say, look at the MSD. What are the requirements? Let's start with that and put something into place. Start small and grow on it. And as you sort of get to the stage where your management system grows and grows, and you decide, okay, now maybe I want to go for external certification. Maybe then you can approach someone and say, could you come and help us and put it all together and then take it forward to the next step. But I think it's also you sort of documenting your processes. And if you do it yourself, you have a much better understanding of what the requirements are. You have a much better understanding of how am I going to actually implement this within the organization to get staff buy-in. So I think it's a mix of both. You've got to be, if you're going external, be very careful of who you engage with. but don't rely on them totally. Get someone that pulls your staff in as well and will work together with you to put the system together.
Thank you very much. That was a great answer off the cuff, so thank you. But you can see it's your passion, and you know your topic very well. Charles, can I ask you a question? And perhaps it's a bit of a silly question, but it's what I could come up with. I really enjoyed the alignment of the management systems to preventing claims. You know, that was a very tangible benefit to me. So, I mean, it could be said to be quite obvious, but what are some of the other benefits that result from the system? I mean, like perhaps just bluntly, like, does it improve the cash flow? Or, you know, does it make your projects more successful? Or in your experience, which is quite extensive, what do you think?
Yeah, thanks for the question, Wally. And two things come to mind. Firstly, the point about being more profitable. I think if you have these management systems in place and you advertise that they're in place, especially if you get your certification up to ISO level and you're certified, I think that you do stand out above the other consultants that don't do that. So I think you will get more work that comes your way. And the second point that I wanted to make as well, and it links to that, is the goal of the management systems isn't to just get the management system in place and be done with it. As Diane advised in her presentation, once it's in place, that's only the start. You need to use the management system to improve your business. And you do that by constantly measuring data and improving where you can. And with that improvement, you'll issue better quality work, you'll increase your reputation in the field, and you'll also get more business. So, you know, I think, you know, working without any sort of management systems in place is sort of like the blind leading the blind. You know, there's no focus and there's no direction. And I think essentially you're relying on luck, and you're taking a lot of risk. And I would caution against that.
Okay. Thank you so much, Charles. That was a great answer, like bit of an ambush questions. Sorry. Thank you. And then finally, I'd like you please to both think about both the presentations were excellent in my view, you know, so, and very comprehensive. But is there like a takeaway point that you can leave with the audience? Something that you're passionate about or really prize or think is really great advice? Diane?
I think we probably touched on it like within the presentation, but I think what is so important with your development of management systems is start embracing technology. Move away from old school. Think, like I said, think differently. You know, everyone says quality is so boring, or management systems are so boring, or health and safety is so boring. You know, think of doing things differently. And also with youngsters involved, like pull in technology. They want to use technology. They want to do things differently. You know, they don't want to go and read a procedure or, you know, fill out copious amounts of checklists if we could possibly do it on a Google form on your iPad, you know. So really think about making it easy, simple, sort of a system to implement. And I think also, like, touching on the whole risk issue, is continually think about risk. And Charles pulled it so nice into his presentation, the Aon dashboard, and it's their analysis of what are common claim trends. And I think what's so important is learn from others' mistakes. You know, I hope people learn from my mistakes. It's use that, see where people have gone wrong, see where claims have arisen. I mean, I think there are also some lovely practice notes about past claims. Have a look at that and try and build your system in such a way that it will prevent those things from happening. So I think my big things, the takeaway is technology and risk, is use what you've got, embrace technology, but really think about risk and say, you know, how can I protect firstly myself and how can I protect my organization?
Thanks, Diane. That's a lovely answer. Charles,
yeah, I think I just wanted to maybe drop one additional point that wasn't quite maybe stressed in my presentation. If you are going to go for ISO certification, just expect that ISO is written in a language that is so generally applied. It applies to all industries, to all companies. And FIDIC actually have an excellent reference guideline, which the title is their interpretation of what the ISO 9001 requirements are for consulting engineers. For instance, you know, ISO refers to customers, whereas, you know, in the consulting industry, we talk about clients. And that's just one small example, but there's lots of other examples where you can read a whole paragraph in the ISO standard and not know exactly what they're asking for. Whereas FIDIC have already done that work of interpreting that paragraph and saying, you know, in a consulting engineer's line of work, they're after this. So if you are going to go for that ISO certification, read that interpretation first before you try and interpret their requirements yourself.
Oh, thank you very much, Charles. I think, just want to thank you for that. And I think we've come to the end of the Q&A session. And I hope the audience has benefited from that. Thought the answers were as impressive as the presentation. So thanks to you both for that. We'd also like to invite the audience to submit any questions if they think of them later, you know, after the presentation. You can submit it to me at wally@cesa.co.za. And then you can also make any suggestions, propose any topics you'd like addressed at future webinars to me at the same address. And so we've reached the end of the webinar, and I'd like to thank our two panelists, Charles and Diane, for availing of their time and for sharing their knowledge and thoughts with us. I really think their presentations and information was out of the top drawer, and well done, guys, and we are grateful. Thanks. And then, of course, a big thank you to you, our delegates, for attending, for supporting CESA and attending this practice note webinar. Regarding CPD, delegates registered with EXA may claim 0.2 CPD points for attending this webinar. And for ease of administration, CPD certificates will be sent to delegates upon their completion of the survey. The survey should pop up on your screen. Thank you. The purpose of that survey is to provide us with your satisfaction ratings and feedback, and hopefully that'll enable us to improve our future webinars. Don't forget, we're having another 4 next year. And just a housekeeping insignificant thing, as a very last point, we'd like to ask members to check their spam regularly for CESA correspondence in case it ends up there. And if it does, then please whitelist our email addresses so that you do actually receive our correspondence. And with that, thank you again for your attendance and participation. And I'd like to wish you a good day further, and then just to say goodbye.